Hello, everyone. I am Maria Marshall. I am the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. As Shelley put in the chat, we are recording the webinar. So if you don't catch something today, you can definitely go back and rewatch it if you would like. Or if you think that somebody who's missed the webinar needs to hear what we have to say. Well, I always think that our webinars are super fascinating. So you can always send them the link when you get it in the email a few days after the webinar. So again, welcome to our webinar, our February webinar, which is Rural Broadband Tools and Resources in the North Central Region. We're going to have two main speakers today. I'm going to introduce three people. Dr. Roberto Gallardo is the director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development, not to confuse for the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, but we work a lot together. He is an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Purdue University, and he works with communities and regions across the country, Colombia, Mexico, Canada, China, over the past 18 years around community and economic development. Our other speaker will be Thomas Keene. He's a Ph.D. student in the Department of Agriculture, Food, and Resource Economics in the Department of Economics at Michigan State University. Thomas is a regional urban economist interested in rural economic development. And Liz Mack will be backing him up. Is associate professor in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences at Michigan State University. Liz's research program evaluates the impact of emerging technologies on the development trajectory of regional economies. This research program includes broadband infrastructure, deployment policy, as well as the impacts of broadband on business location. And then Roberto, if you'll get to the next slide, I'll tell them all about our next webinar. So our next webinar is in March, and it's coming up quick because usually we try to have a little bit more time between webinars, but it'll be March 7th from 1 to 2. It's titled Be Prepared in the North Central Region, a community planning approach to green infrastructure, hazard mitigation, and flooding. So I think that's also going to be super interested. It is co-branded with Eden, the Extension Disaster Education Network. So I look forward to that webinar as well. And usually the intro allows people to come in as we move from meeting to meeting now with our Zoom schedules. So Roberto, with that, I'm going to hand it off to you to start off the first part of our webinar.
Thank you very much, Maria. Nice to see you, and hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be sharing the stage with Liz and Thomas as well. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the rural broadband tools and resources at the center, but I'm going to focus primarily on the Digital Divide Index, which I'm going to speak about shortly. It's a tool that we've developed that has gotten some traction recently because of COVID, but we've been publishing this project or this data set since 2016. Before we go into the DDI, though, I would like to share with you something we just got out last week, and it was extension inspired, extension motivated. As we all know, there's a lot of communities working around broadband. So I got some calls from extension educators asking if there were any sort of talking points they could use or some material to inform at a very, very basic elementary level their stakeholders around broadband, because everybody's talking about broadband nowadays. There's a significant amount of money coming down the pike, and so we felt it was good to help them. So we have the oh, I thought I had it here. Okay, well, before I go to the tools and resources, research is pretty clear. Liz is a great researcher. She's published around this a lot, but in general, I will tell you that we now have a ton of evidence that broadband is good for a host of situations. This was not the case 5 years ago, 8 years ago. We knew, those of us in broadband, there was something going on, but now there's tremendous amount of research going on. And so here you can see that we now know household incomes are affected in a positive way, employment levels, firm attraction, farm profits, lower COVID mortality. So you can see that broadband can be a game changer. It's at the centerpiece of community development in this digital age, for sure. So I just wanted to share with you this kind of we now have documentation that it has great benefits. But the question becomes, how can we get folks to understand their issue? As my colleagues would agree, broadband is a local problem, meaning it's very sensitive to geography and how local it is, because at the end of the day, it comes down to the street level. And so it's important to keep that in mind. About the extension educator, I just wanted you to know that we have been working on this topic here at the center for a while now, at least 5 years. And we have developed a digital inclusion toolbox. Feel free to go visit the website at the bottom to learn more about what we offer. But I wanted to point out this, what is broadband flyer, before I jump into the DDI, because it will complement the DDI really well. Again, this is at the very basic level, provides talking points for extension educators. I've had a couple of them react to it, use it. So it's been vetted by those in the field as common sense and not confusing and not academic at all. So feel free to get this, share this with your networks when and if needed. Okay, so now let's switch to the digital divide index. Let me give you a little bit of context. When I was back in Mississippi in my career, the digital divide was a little bit of an abstract concept. It was when you mentioned that, people would stare at you like, what are you talking about? COVID came and helped tremendously in this sense, in the awareness piece. Back in the day, people were not making the connection or connecting the dots between broadband and quality of life, broadband and health, broadband and rural development. And then, of course, COVID hit and it changed everything. Yeah, I think it accelerated the awareness at least 5 years, if not more. So back in the day, we were trying to develop a tool that could help communities understand what was then an abstract concept. And so we came up with the Digital Divide Index. Now, please keep in mind this DDI is more for practitioners. I get multiple requests every month for research, and it has been used in journal articles and other research, but its original idea, intent, was for practitioners, was to help them understand this abstract concept of the digital divide. And what better way to do that than to come up with scores? People understand scores. And so we designed this instrument to do that, to provide scores. And I'm going to show you a live demonstration soon about how to use this data set. But it basically comprises of 10 indicators. To the right on my slide, on your screen, you can see the digital divide profile. We have one for each state, and we also have one for each county in Indiana. The idea is to summarize everything into this profile. You can see that the 10 variables include what we call two groups. One is the infrastructure adoption score or section, and the other one is a socioeconomic score as well. And then together, they're not added up. They are standardized using z-scores and a weighted average, and then you get the overall DDI score. People ask me, why don't they add up? And it's because that was not designed that way. We also normalized the scores from 0 to 100, where a higher number denotes issues, right? A higher divide. And so, for example, we also wanted to include that socioeconomic piece. Why? Because many times infrastructure may be available, but folks don't subscribe to it. They may have faster speeds available. They just don't upgrade because they may not be able to afford it. So research shows there are some demographic characteristics that can limit folks to adopt technology at the pace of early adopters, for example. So that's why we came up with the socioeconomic score, not because it's bad that you have a higher share of seniors or poor or whatever the case may be. It's really more so you can kind of frame the issue around the socioeconomic characteristics of your community. So the first set of variables relates to infrastructure adoption score. And this one again looks at households without a computing device. That one affects adoption. You may have internet, but if you don't have the adequate devices to navigate, then you're not going to subscribe. Households with no internet access, all these come from the ACS survey. Back in the day, 2016, we used FCC data, which we all know, I'm guessing we all know, Federal Communications Commission tends to overstate availability. And we also are now using Ookla speed tests. Now, folks, a disclaimer, there is no perfect broadband data, okay? Ookla speed test has a lot of issues. The speed tests themselves, so does the FCC data, and so does the ACS data, right? There's no perfect broadband data, so please keep that in mind. This is really more to inform local folks about this. We decided to use speed tests because at the end of the day, that's what people experience, right? Latency may be an issue, the configuration of their network may be an issue, but at the end of the day, they experience speeds, right? They experience that, and so we felt that that was good to include. So that's how we calculated the percent of people without access to 100 megabits per second download and 20 megabits per second upload. In the past, we've used FCC data. Before that, we used Microsoft data. So again, there's a ton of variables there, but it seems that we've settled with Ookla speed test, at least for this particular variable. We also calculated, weighted by number of speed tests, the average download and upload speeds. We are currently working on some research to really find out how much is enough for internet speeds, meaning after you increase your average speed by a certain number of megabits per second, does that have an impact on employment, wages, whatever it is. So all these are taken together. They're weighted a certain way. You can check the website to see the methodology, and then we come up with the score. In the case of Indiana, it's 36.4 among all 50 states, so it's under the 50 mark. So it means it's on the better half of the states, because remember, lower is better. When it comes to the socioeconomic score, though, this one we looked at percent population age 65 and older. We looked at percent age 25 and older with less than high school. We're finding age is a really a big it explains the digital divide pretty well. Age does. Urban and rural continues to be important, but age is starting to elevate, at least the research we've done. So that's why we included those two variables there. We also have learned that disability can affect internet use. So we included the disability portion variable here. Poverty, obviously, income, affordability, and everything associated with it. Now, these are highly correlated among them, but then again, we're not doing a spatial regression of any sort. It's more of descriptive purposes. And then we came up with a new variable. We kept getting questions. How bad is digital inequality in our community? We're like, we'll get back to you. And we came up with the internet income ratio, or IIR, which is the ratio of homes making less than $35,000 per year without internet, divided by the share of homes making $75,000 or more without internet. So in the case of Indiana, the share of lower income households without internet is almost 6 times higher compared to the wealthier homes. Again, it's not meant to be comprehensive or the single inequality measure, but this again resonates with policymakers, it resonates with practitioners. And so we took all those as well to calculate the socioeconomic score. Here, Indiana is a little bit worse off. It's close to the 50 mark. This only means that these indicators are above average since we are using z-scores, and I'm not going to get into the statistical boring stuff. But at the end of the day, the overall score for Indiana was 39.56. Again, that's in the better half of all 50 states. And so this is how you should interpret the DDI. Again, it's a descriptive tool. It's designed to increase awareness, kind of wrap your head around this topic and jumpstart conversations. One of the things I get all the time is when I go meet with a region or a county, the first thing they ask me is, how's the neighboring county doing? And so that tells you that they're that's the way they frame it, Friday high school football, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why we feel that it's been tweaked. It's been around for 7 years, and we've had a ton of engagement to make sure this resonates. And more importantly, it is useful for practitioners to understand this situation. So this is kind of an overview of the DDI. It's kind of why we built it and how to interpret the results. So what I tell communities is, look at Indiana here, for example, and tell me, because of limited resources, If the infrastructure adoption score is way higher than the socioeconomic score, then more than likely you've got to focus on infrastructure, you've got to focus on adoption programs. If, on the other hand, the socioeconomic score is higher or way higher, that is highly subjective. It can be 2 points, it can be 20. It's up to the community, right? Because then they kind of cross-check with their word of mouth, their perception of their community. But if the socioeconomic score is higher than the infrastructure adoption score, then you may want to focus more on digital literacy and relevance and so forth, because those you have an above average share of demographics that are known to lag in technology adoption. So before I pivot to the live demonstration of the tool, does anybody have any questions? Or I don't know, Maria, if I should wait towards the end, you tell me, sorry.
You can take a question now. I see one from Lisa in the
Oh,
chat.
okay. I don't have access to the chat.
Oh, here, let me give, I'll read it to you. Have you drilled down into individual counties to be able to see the DDI scores via counties versus statewide?
Yes, and I'll be happy to demonstrate that shortly. That's a great question. Now, keep in mind, because these are based on Z-scores, the pool of geographies you use will matter. So it's not a total apple-to-apple comparison to use a census tract level score and compare it to a county or a state. However, it does frame the discussion. And yes, I'm going to get into, we have this at the county level and we have this at the census tract level, which is a sub-county measure. It's the furthest we can go down. We could potentially go down to block groups, but the margin of error there is a little bit too high. Census tracts is also a little bit high, but it is what it is. So yes, we go to the tract level, to the county level. We can also just look at urban counties across the country and recalculate the Z-scores, the DDI scores. I get requests all the time from specific states, because what I'm going to share with you shortly includes all counties and all tracts in the US. Some states tell me, I don't want to be compared with California. I don't want to be compared with New York. Can you just calculate the scores only using counties or tracts in my state? And we can easily do that. And sorry, that was a long answer to say yes, we do have at that county tracking. Any other questions before I shift to the live demonstration?
There's nothing right now in the chat, so I think we can move forward, Roberto.
Okay, so can you see my browser? I just dragged it over. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, so you go to pcrd.purdue.edu/DDI, and you can see here we have the interactive map, we have the methodology. Here's data usage. This is public data. We are glad to share. I get that so far this year, we published the 2021 version about a month ago, and we've gotten over 20 requests of a lot of medical related stuff. That's interesting, but we've gotten, requests from Berkeley, and we've gotten requests from research universities and so forth, think tanks and whatever. So here I want to show, this is where you can go to the interactive map. Let me show this first. So this one, it's at the county level. Oh, we also have congressional districts because the US Senate contacted me about this, and I had to calculate everything. The areas that are in black in the map means there's data missing. I couldn't calculate it because there's some variable missing. The odds increase with the more variables you use. So unfortunately, we do not have for all counties. It's just due to data availability. But I want to share with you, this one divides in low, moderate, and high, divides the equal number of counties per DDI scores. So you can play with this here. If you do not want to see DDI scores in 3 groups, you can use average download speeds, for example, and it will recalculate in the map, and you can see how it plays out. You can see average upload speeds as well, how they play out in the map. These are all the underlying variables of the DDI. No internet access from ACS, you can see that on the map, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let me go back to the DDI score, because you can see here, it may seem that there's a lot of dark blue, which is high, but look what happens when you zoom in into, say, Chicago. Hold on, let's take a look at two. Here you can see, I think these are tracts, not counties, I apologize. But look at Chicago. If I toggle back to county, notice how Chicago will appear light blue, or Cook County. Actually, this is a point made that the digital divide affects everybody. It's not mostly rural, it affects everybody. But here you can see that Cook County is light, meaning on the low end. But when you switch to tract, as I was earlier, you can see that there are some dark spots even within Cook County. So hopefully this really provides a little bit more information. So look at here, you can see Gary, Indiana, and other areas. So that's Chicago. You can immediately see the areas, right, that are kind of have a high digital divide within what otherwise would be a low divide area based on the geography. So the more general or bigger the geography, you lose that sensitivity to the issues at the local level. You can switch to congressional districts if needed. You can see that there. Again, you can go between tract and county and use whatever metric you have here. The point again is increase awareness and jumpstart conversations, okay? I've seen this work firsthand, how they start discussing, you know what, yeah, that's true, this neighborhood and that neighborhood. And so it does get people kind of fired up in discussing about this topic that, again, believe me, back in the day, it was like alien to them when you mentioned, hey, how's the digital divide in your community? They're like, what are you talking about? So any questions before I demonstrate another quick piece here and then turn it over to my colleagues of the map? I know that was fast, sorry, but it's being recorded and you can always go and play with the map itself.
So you have a quick question from Lisa. She says Stark County is completely in dark blue. So that tells me what exactly?
It tells you there's a high digital divide. So we divided every county, every tract in the nation between low, moderate, and high based on their DDI scores or based on the metrics you see on the left. So if you're on the dark blue side, you're on the high end of whatever variable you're looking at. And if it's a DDI score, that means, remember that it goes from 0 to 100. So the higher it is, the more the divide. So if your county's in dark blue, that means that it is Stark County. What state is that? Let me see if I can find it. Do we know what state? Well, I'm just going to click. I forgot to mention this, that if you click on the county, it will give you.
Indiana.
Okay. If you click on your county, it will give you the actual variables, right? It'll break them up by download, upload, you know, the ones we discussed earlier. So feel free to go there. If it's all dark blue, switch to tracts and see if there are any light areas within your county. You may want to target the areas that are dark blue at the census tract level to begin with. Another one we just published is we finally, since data has been changing, it's not, unfortunately, we cannot go back to 2016 and compare, but we do now have 2019, 2020, and 2021 at the state level. So if you click on South Dakota, for example, and click on PDF report, it'll give you a quick snapshot of which variables moved over time within the underlying variables as well as the scores, meaning everything that goes down is better, goes up is not good. So here you can see North Dakota or South Dakota, how it's moving. Now, keep in mind, this is descriptive purposes. It uses ACS, which is within the 5-year frame. You're not supposed to compare within that time frame, but this is for descriptive purposes only. And I'm sorry, that was a comment for very data geeks like myself. But regardless, we have these profiles for each state in the country, and we also have them for Indiana. To wrap up, I'm going to show you here, if you go to Rural Indiana Stats, under here in digital inclusion, you can go here. This is for Indiana only, so the scores will not be the same because, again, we're only using Indiana counties here, not the entire US. And you can go to the DDI profiles. You can select, for example, Adams County, download, and here we have the exact same profile, but for all counties in Indiana, like we had for the state. In parentheses, you can see the state average, so you can kind of see where you are. So this particular county has a score of 56.82, but look at the infrastructure adoption score is way higher, 65 versus 37. This means that they need to place an emphasis on infrastructure and adoption just because it's way higher. And look at the percent of households without a computing device, it's 1/5 in the county compared to only 8% in the state. So I know that was a lot to take in, but go here and play with it. And so hopefully this tool can help you guys kind of better understand what is going on in your communities. It is one tool. I know my colleagues will present another tool they're developing, and I've heard of a multiple other that are popping up all over the place. So that's good. You have more tools at your disposal as you try to work around the digital divide in your communities. So that's my portion of it. I'm going to give 5 minutes back to my colleagues, or if there are any questions, I'm here to answer.
We can take a couple of questions while Thomas is loading up his PowerPoint and sharing that with us. If there's what question, I posted up the URL. That was a question. I went to the story maps or DRS, whatever, the PCRD DDI website. Oh, there's a question here. Is there any place which shows the DDI for all states in a single table?
In a single table, no, but we can get those to you. We can create one. That's a good idea. You can go to the DDI trends and look at each state, but then that's a good idea. We can add a table, or I can send you the raw data if needed. I know Louisiana asked for that for all 50 states, the actual data underlying the profiles we did for the DDI trends. I can reach out to me, Roberto G at Purdue.edu, and I'll be happy to send you the raw data for each state.
Can you put your email in the chat, Roberto, when you get a chance? That way.
Yes, of course. I forgot about that. Sorry.
Great. Thank you. Thomas, then I'm going to hand it over to you now.
All right. Thank you so much. So my name's Thomas Keene. I'm a Ph.D. student at MSU, and I'm part of two different departments, the Department of Agriculture, Food, and Resource Economics, and then the Department of Economics. And I'll be presenting a map that maps local broadband provision in the U.S. This has been a research product of my work with Liz Mack, who is here, and then a bunch of other researchers, including Scott Loveridge and John Mann. So thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be invited here. Okay, and before I start the official presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the funding we've received for this project. So this presentation and its contents are supported in part by the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture AFRI grant, and then a Hatch project grant also from the USDA. So an overview of my presentation. First, I'll introduce broadband provision in the United States and the motivation for our map. I'll provide a background of provision in the United States. Then I'll talk about the methodology of BITS, which is the data set we use for our map. And then what makes our map different from other resources. I'll demonstrate the map app, and then I'll discuss its limitations, and then open it up for you all to give us feedback on what we should include next. So as Roberto talked about in his presentation, people in the United States lack access to high-speed internet. Often we think of lacking high accessibility as a rural and tribal area problem, but Roberto also showed us that it affects urban populations as well. And as Roberto also talked about, there are many dimensions of accessibility in local markets, and the dimensions are availability primarily and adoption primarily as well. So the FCC measures a lot of these types of things, availability and adoption. Most of the data is based on availability. And these measures are used to determine broadband policy in the United States as a whole, and also in local governance. However, these resources provided by the FCC often do not display change over time. So we have created an app that displays the changes in broadband provision over time to help inform citizens, researchers, and policymakers of local trends in broadband provision. So as I briefly mentioned, broadband access is multidimensional. There is availability issues. So it's whether high-speed internet is available in an area. And then there are adoption issues, whether residents use internet and the factors associated with it. And Roberto's DDI index uses information on both of these parts, availability and adoption, to create that index. But our tool specifically talks about availability. And so a brief history of availability data in the United States. So in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, there was funding that was directed towards broadband. And two of the tenets of that funding were to improve broadband data collection and then maintain maps devoted to mapping availability and provision of broadband. So much of the responsibility fell on the Federal Communications Commission to provide and collect that data and then disseminate it to the public. So the FCC collects several types of data. The big ones are the FCC Form 477 data and the ISP reports. And then they display it through maps in many ways. And one of their most famous resources is the National Broadband Map. So our map and our data set specifically uses that FCC Form 477 data, and we integrate the annual reports or the annual forms into a time series or a panel data set where you get to see at the tract level how many providers there are in each tract in each year over time. So we harmonize shifting census blocks and tract level data into 2010 tracts. We then identify unique internet providers or holding companies at the tract level, and then we provide counts of those unique providers in a tract. Then our web app specifically adds several features to the underlying data. So we incorporate counts or changes in counts over time. And then we also add layers of other boundaries, such as congressional districts and tribal areas. So compared to other resources, as Roberto said, there's a lot being created right now, which is great. So this is not a comprehensive or extensive comparison between all the resources available at the moment. But our BITS map, or the BITS map app that we have created, talks specifically about availability or a measure of availability in tracts throughout the entire contiguous United States. And it offers a time series component to those counts. So we offer information on the number of providers in a given tract from 2014 to 2020. So now is the demonstration portion. So I'll press this link and hopefully you'll see my internet browser open. And it takes us to the web app. So it offers a splash screen just to talk about the data that we are using, along with a citation to the paper that presented the BITS data set. And then let's get into it. So here's the map, and you can choose different layers. So for example, you can choose the congressional districts to appear, counties to appear, and then also American Indian lands, Alaska Native areas, and Hawaiian homelands. You can also change the layer to represent different years in the number of broadband providers, and I'll just stick to 2020. So I have these 3 layers on, and I'll zoom into an area of interest. So for right now, I'll just choose Michigan, because we're from Michigan State. And then I'll turn on this select area of interest, and it zooms right in. You can see the counties, and you can also see the tribal lands in Michigan. and then I'll select a county. So for example, I'll choose Isabella County, which has that big tribal land in it. So zooming in on this county, you can see the tract level data. You can see where the reservation is in this county. And then you can select different tracts to see first the number of providers in 2020, then the change in providers between 2 different years. So the most recent year we have currently 2020, and then different years. So 2019, 2016, 2014. And then you'll have the historic data going back to 2014 of all of the number of providers in a certain area. So you can choose different tracts. You can see how they compare with one another. And you can move throughout the contiguous United States to see this data. And now I'm going to exit this out and go back to my presentation. Okay, perfect. So we have this map, and how is it useful for different types of people? So first, we'll start with citizens. So citizens can look at change over time in their areas to assess changing availability in their own area. And very importantly, citizens can use this tool in tandem with the FCC National Broadband Map to spot and report inconsistencies and then make informed decisions on switching broadband providers. So as Roberto said, FCC data is notoriously, there's bias in it and measurement error, and that's the same across many different measures of broadband. And an initiative that you can do as a citizen is look at what providers are available for your household and then tell the FCC whether they got that right or wrong. So using this tool and the National Broadband Map, you can be an active person in making broadband data better as a citizen. Now for researchers, they can look at changes over time to identify specific areas of interest for further study. They can also identify geographic variation for maybe regression discontinuity or spatial discontinuity studies. And then they can use it to identify temporal variation. So there are 4 types of variation that we think of: stable provision counts, then a trend towards monopolization. So real quick, these provision or provider data doesn't necessarily talk about competition, but there are certain areas where there are a lot of providers, and then all of a sudden there is one. And some of these areas are tribal areas that have decided to have their own tribal telecommunications company. So you're using this this resource, you can identify tracts that have that trend and then use it for your own research. Then the other sorts of interesting areas are catching up. So places that didn't have many providers in an area that are now have many, and then areas that have always had many providers, which are called leading the pack, or what we call leading the pack tracks. Now for people interested in policymaking and local governance. So local policymakers can use this tool to change filters to visualize areas of local governance. So first, they can add that congressional district layer or that tribal area layer. And then they can identify geographic variation around their area of interest to figure out place-based policies. You can also use temporal variation to identify lagging areas in jurisdictions, and then identify and research areas that may have better policy environments for broadband providers. So some limitations to our map. So provision levels is a measure of availability, but there are issues with it, right? So you will see the amount of providers in an area, but it does not necessarily show the true coverage in that area, which is just a problem with FCC Form 477 data. And it's a problem with many other broadband measures available to us at this moment. Also, provision levels is not a measure of competition. So if there is an area with a lot of provision, it does not necessarily mean the prices are lower because there are more people competing. There are more internet providers competing directly with one another. And then in terms of accessibility, it's not the whole story. So Roberto's measure talks about DDI, the digital divide index, that adds other measures and creates an index. Ours specifically looks only at availability. So as I said, there's measurement error in the FCC Form 477 data. And part of this could be potential incentive incompatibility between parties. When I say that, it means, does an internet provider have the incentives to accurately report their coverage areas between their agreement with the FCC? And there are concerns that the current institutions and just laws that govern this agreement between providers and the FCC may not be complete. So, for example, Comcast has given false map data to the FCC, and currently in Michigan, the high-speed internet office is creating a bulk challenge where they say, hey, these are areas that are not actually being covered that we need to show the FCC. So the state of Michigan is actively trying to remedy the data discrepancies in the FCC data. And they are also showing that availability is still a problem in areas of the United States, not just adoption. Another issue with that form FCC data is that providers have the right to withhold their coverage areas for public distribution, which may also cause issues with the numbers you see on this map. However, there are issues with all types of data measuring broadband. So this is still a good tool. And also the data here is used for many federal and local government decisions. So these are this is the official data that is used to make those decisions. So I've provided different links, and now is your opportunity to offer questions, ways to improve, and features you'd like to see in our web app. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Thomas. We are open for questions. I'm wondering if you or Liz could put the link in the chat. That might make it easier for people to be able to go to it. Thanks. Feel free to write up any questions in the chat for Thomas, Liz, or Roberto, or to unmute yourself. So as we're waiting, I'll ask a question. As we're waiting, I think so. One of the things you said that the app would be useful for, or you're hoping it will be used, is by residents to actually go in, see it, and be able to provide, I guess, accurate, as you said, accurate information on what is actually available in their communities. So what are some of the ways that you all are promoting this, kind of at the, I think you said citizen or resident level, for people to be kind of like, as I guess the citizen research or citizen, I forget what it's called, I think it's called citizen research, right? When you go and you're asked. So what are some of the ways that you guys are kind of thinking about doing outreach, or if you are doing outreach, that you're getting the word out?
So I don't know. So here in Indiana, Maria, we've done broadband surveys at the county level. It's not the perfect measure. There's some bias, response bias and so forth. But we did end up surveying over 16,000 homes in Indiana over the past, or during 3 years, over 3 years. And the findings are pretty consistent with what you see in these large data sets when it comes to its inaccuracy. It takes a lot more work, but the best data to me is the local data. In addition to that, when you're doing planning, they tend to trust more their data, the one they know they collected, rather than secondary sources like the census and so forth. So to your question, in my case, has been generating local data and then cross-checking with additional data sources, but that kind of empowers, motivates, fires up folks when they realize that their data could be put to good use.
Roberto, Thomas or Liz?
Sure. So I just wanted to highlight something else about the data that might have been sort of lost in the shuffle. There have been several reporting changes to the FCC data. And so at various points in time, people have used, the National Broadband Map was one that was available from 2010 to 2014. And so a lot of people use that. It had a handy interface for people to kind of work with that. So if you weren't a geographer, it was a little bit more friendly way to deal with some of the data. Then, from the form 477. The advantage of the data set that we put together is if you want a time series of information as a signal of what is what could be going on with broadband in your community, you actually have a time series now, which before the FCC data was sort of this interrupted time series of 1999 to 2004, 2005 to 2008, and so forth. And so the web app only presents the last 6 years or so of data, but if you want even more historical data, you can go to the original paper. To promote this, we did a little press release about the paper. I guess we can tweet about it. So if anyone has any ideas about good ways to get out this webinar is one of the ways that we're trying to let people know that our historical time series is available. But if anyone has any suggestions on the call, we are open to further promoting our efforts. Thanks.
I think
Sorry, yeah, I just realized here I'm having a conversation to myself. Any other questions or comments or suggestions? I think Thomas said that they were open to some of the things that you might like to see. I know Roberto got a good got a good comment about some things. So if you have suggestions on their app or some things you'd like to see, I'm sure they are obviously very much open to it. Oh, I see here, our zip codes data available. So is it available at the zip code level?
I can comment on that a little bit. The original FCC data was available at the zip code level from 1999 to 2008. There's actually a public response to issues with using zip codes as a unit of analysis. And so the FCC got rid of zip codes as a basis for reporting the forms for 477 data. So yeah, it used to be available at the zip code, but the FCC has moved away from that.
Great. Okay, now there's questions coming in. Oh, so a suggestion for how to get the word out is to put info in tribal newspapers, somebody's putting in theirs tomorrow. So I think you're already gonna get some traction. Hopefully folks will go back and spread the word.
Yeah, thank you. We're also working with the College of Menominee Nation to do some of our research, specifically in broadband availability in the Menominee Nation. So yes, any additions to tribal newspapers, if you want to contact us so we can interview you and give you surveys, that would be greatly appreciated as well.
Great. Any more questions, comments, suggestions? It's a Monday and I think everybody's has rainy. If you're like me, it's rainy and cloudy, so everybody's low energy today. Well, if you think of anything as I'm wrapping up, please make sure to put it in the chat. Again, Roberto, Liz, Thomas, thank you so much for the webinar and telling us about these great tools that are really necessary. We're all needing to kind of think about this. I know that when we did our listening sessions for national and the North Central region, broadband infrastructure and understanding it came up as a high priority for extension faculty and staff across the region and nationally. So this is definitely very much needed databases. I think you're getting a whole bunch of thank yous. And I think somebody was asking, oh yes, we will be sending you an email with the webinar again. So you can rewatch it to see how things are working. Again, everybody, thank you so much. And please join us at our next webinar on March 7th. Thanks again.